and I am thrilled to be introducing Genevieve Gaignard to our galleries this afternoon. This is the last program in a series of them on the occasion of Real World's Arbus, Brassaï, and Goldin, which we'll walk through with Genevieve in just a moment. But I wanted Genevieve to be a part of this series, which is a way for the museum to invite artists in to reflect on their own practice, but also to describe another artist's practice through their own lens, if you will. And I will, because because that's some of what you do. So today, I just feel that this could not be a more appropriate way to end the exhibition run of programs because of Genevieve's own work in photography and the influence of Arbus on her own practice, which she'll expand on today. So before I hand the mic off to Genevieve, a few words about her practice. Genevieve's work mixes elements of self-portraiture, collage, and sculpture to present nuanced issues surrounding race, beauty, and cultural identity. Her stage photographs create a platform for what she has called persona play performances within both public and private spaces. The performances Genevieve enacts within her own photographs are a combination of autobiography and allegory. Gaignard was born in Massachusetts, attained her MFA in photography at Yale, and is represented by Shulamit Nazarian here in Los Angeles, where Genevieve lives and works. I do not have time to run through this last year of your incredible accomplishments, but Genevieve has been featured in the most recent Prospect New Orleans, #4. And for more kind of information about the practice as it exists now, tons of new work. It's been an incredibly productive year for you. I'm so proud. Please check out the recent New Yorker article on Genevieve's work. Yes. On the occasion of her exhibition up currently at Flag Art Foundation in Chelsea, New York. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Genevieve.
Hello. That's what I sound like. So I guess out here I was going to talk about basically everything she just talked about. But to be clear, that I'm going to be focusing on the work of Deanne Arbus and not the other two photographers because she is, in this really awesome way, this kind of full circle moment where she's why I kind of am here, I think. That like felt emotional.
It is.
Ooh. So also there's a music component to a part of the show, and it's quite loud in the room. So there might be moments where I'm talking in the Brassaï room so that we can all kind of converse. Then we'll go inside and just take a moment to look at the photographs, and then maybe come back. But we'll just kind of play it by ear, depending on how loud the music is. So as Amanda was saying, I'm an interdisciplinary artist. I work in photography, installation, video, kind of whatever I need to use to get my point across. I'm mixed race. My mom is white, my dad is black, and so in just focusing on the photography aspect of it, I photograph myself as different characters to talk about how we navigate through the world as others see us. And I usually am seen as white, but that's not my whole story. It's part of my story, but not my whole story. So I'm interested in how, being introduced to Diane's work, I could see myself in that round. So I'm gonna kind of start by mentioning how I first was introduced to the work of Arbus, and that would be starting back in 2001, when I signed up for my first photography class at the local community college in my town. And I was kind of just like at this point where I was being encouraged to even attempt being an artist. So I went to the community college, signed up for all these classes, but then I was like, I just have to take a black and white photography class. I didn't really know what to expect. But on the first day, there was a slide presentation. So as photography history is, it was kind of Brassaï after Brassaï, also known as white guy after white guy, on the slide presentation. And then I was kind of stopped in my tracks with this one image that was on the screen believe the title is Boy with Toy Hand Grenade, which is in the show, so we'll go check that out in a minute. And I was just really stopped in my tracks. And then on top of that, know that it was taken by a woman was even more encouraging to me. Things that are spoken to about what Diane photographs is that she photographed freaks. I think she even kind of described it as that, the kind of not everyday type people. So as I discovered these people that she was photographing, there's actually a quote that she says that I really like. I really believe that there are things nobody would see if I did not photograph them. And so thinking about that, I want to go into the next room, have us walk around, and I'll do my best to kind of focus, everyone's attention on the specific images that I'm speaking to. So I'm standing in front of the image that I was referencing, that I first kind of was introduced to her work, and this idea of the freak and the other, and that all these words are resonating with me in an interesting way. And to transition from this image to then this photograph over here of a couple on a bench, an interracial couple to be specific, is when I've really resonated with the work on a really personal way, in the sense of my parents. And so seeing myself, hearing that this image is talked about as these freaks, these others, I'm thinking, oh, I'm someone that Arbus would have photographed as well, even. So I kind of just really got obsessed with the images and just kind of really wanted to mimic everything she was doing. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the camera that she used, but it's a twin lens camera. So the act of photographing, she's actually looking down at the camera on the ground glass. So she's not always making eye contact with her subjects. So there's these moments where people can kind of, just let a part of themselves go or reveal to them. So that is an interesting layer to, I think, how she really captured specific emotion, I think, in these subjects. Just referring to my notes. So the mimicking of Arbus was really down to using the same camera she used, printing my photographs in the same way. I don't know if in this particular show, but you'll notice in this image the rough edges, and those are all the things that I was, really interested in copying. I wasn't as brazen as her or curious as her as to stop strangers on the streets to photograph them. So I kind of, in my own way, found subjects and created more freak-like situations for them to be in. I would ask my friends, like grandmothers or something, if they would ask if I could show up and photograph them. And so I would go to their house, and it'd get to the point where I'd ask if the woman would maybe open the freezer door and put her head in it to just activate some sort of oddity. I don't know if that was, the thing that I was supposed to be getting, but that's what I was doing. And in this corner as well, I wanted to reference this image of an interior space that doesn't actually have a person inside it. And so as part of my practice, I do installations. And so it's interesting to see kind of the aesthetic that I'm interested in, that I reference in my own work, showing up in the time that she actually photographed. So there's moments of that really kind of looking back inform my practice in a way that I didn't really think about, And also just to open it up to questions while I'm referencing pictures, if that's okay, if anyone feels so inclined.
Come to kind of imagine yourself as Arbus would see you.
Say again?
Did you kind of imagine yourself as Arbus would see you, or kind of compose you, her gaze or vision of you when you looked at these?
So I didn't always photograph myself. It's not till more recently that I started photographing myself. I think it was in graduate school when I really turned the camera on myself specifically. And before that, I was just really interested in finding that thing that I had in myself in other people, I think. And I think another thing with Arbus's work is she taught me to see beauty in a different way, because I was being told that these subjects weren't beautiful, but I was so drawn to the beauty in them. So there was a shift of like thinking and discovering her work. As Amanda mentioned earlier, I went to school at Yale, and we were often told or given lectures on different artists. And so the day that they were lecturing on Diane, I was overjoyed, thinking, I'm going to get some really awesome insight on these pieces, and kind of just like a little more about her and how she interacted with other photographers that she hung out with. And to be clear, like, she was always hanging with the guys. It wasn't like she was like one of, there weren't other female photographers that she was, had support or, conversing with. So my professor at Yale was giving a lecture on Diane, and I was getting excited about this story that he's telling. So he's in Central Park, runs into Diane, and she has a distraught look on her face, supposedly. And so he said, "What's the matter, Diane?" And she said, "I just got my period, and I don't have a tampon." That was the end of the story. Real life stuff, but also a man saying that she couldn't kind of cut it in the world of but I'm sure she figured it out, but I also feel like she had this kind of way of tweaking people a little bit with her comments and her photography. Not even shock value, but kind of just like owning every part of it, Yeah. So moments like that, and I'm the kind of artist that if I get provoked or angered about a specific happening or topic, then I won't necessarily shout it from the rooftops. I won't grab the mic and whatever, but I actually will make a piece in response to a specific situation. So at the time while I was at Yale, I created shoes, these different character shoes, to kind of remove the actual person from the situation, because I'm often being compared to not Diane Arbus, to Cindy Sherman. And so how do I create work that is removed from that a little bit? So I was creating these shoes. And so there was a particular pair of shoes that I made that I proceeded to cover in tampons and a giant spider with blood dripping down it and some profanities written on it. Kind of like, this is what I'm going to wear as I go out into the world to take on, white man photography guys telling us that we can't hold up. So yeah, that's that was an intense story. It sounded better in my head. And I think, yeah, the fact that, I want to talk about fearlessness a little bit. And so Diane, in things that she's written or things that have been written about her, she's said that she had this kind of fear before she went out go out and photograph. And in my own practice, when I take on characters, it's actually quite hard for me to kind of calm myself, because I feel like I already navigate through the world in this kind of question mark other bubble. So I then put another facade on top of how I already feel, and then I have to have some sort of understanding of how this person might be perceived in the world, and there's a lot of fear in that. So I think inspired by her fearlessness, I've kind of pushed beyond, even though it's scary, I'm still kind of pushing on to like put that message out there. The elephant in the room, and that would be this wallpaper that has been incorporated into this installation. Funny enough, in my installations, I'm kind of known for incorporating vintage wallpapers into my work. And so when I came in to see the show, I was kind of, it was almost like, you know, I've spent all this time kind of following the way that she worked. And then I have this moment where she's kind of, even though she's not here, she didn't make this decision, but is then working in a way that I work, which was an interesting layer. And if it's not clear, this portrait of the triplets on the bed, it appears that they have the wallpaper from that image.
The other female artists that you derive inspiration from?
So I don't fit this box of a list per se. I think as artists we're constantly asked what inspires us. I didn't grow up going to a lot of museums or even being exposed to many artists. So, and then when I went into photography, there were less female photographers to kind of be drawn to. So I draw from music and things like that. And a lot of my aesthetic and interest just comes from my mom and her kind of, the things that she surrounded us with growing up. Even in my house growing up, we had all vintage wallpaper, and so when I incorporate that now, it's kind of a nod to that time, you know, or just like growing up. So I can't really rattle off a list of artists that have gotten me through, but I do want to take a moment to say that on like the other side of these walls, there's amazing Black women on the walls that I went to school with, and they're part of the permanent collection here. So it's really an amazing time to be talking about Arbus, but also being in the same space with those women, you know. I'm not in the permanent collection yet.
So, as someone who sort of works on both sides of the camera, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on what Arbus is sort of, what you imagine or how you understand what Arbus is creating in terms of a relationship, in terms of how her subjects are also performing before the camera. I'm just would love to hear you riff on that.
So I can only speculate, really. But I was here checking out the show earlier this week, and I had this moment of saying, you know, a lot of people were kind of assuming that maybe this artist photographed herself, which she did do some self-portraiture stuff, but it wasn't like her main focus. But she somehow is revealed in her interest in these types of people is very specific, and how she can communicate to them to break a wall down, that they're able to like reveal so much of themselves in those photographs, that it's kind of like this back and forth where I actually am in front of the camera, behind the camera, in front of the, you know, like back and forth. This, you see it in the final thing where you're like, how did she get that response? How much of that is her? What did she say just before she took the picture, you know? There's a book that has some of the contact sheets of these particular shoots, and like the boy with the hand grenade, like that was, I think, frame 8, and then she continued to shoot after that. I think there's 12 shots on a roll. So to kind of go through that and see her process, where she wasn't getting the thing, and you can see the kid slowly getting a little more frustrated, and then, I mean, he's not a freak or whatever, you know, like in that box or category, but he does this thing that then takes him there, but it had to be engaged by her, you know. But for me, being in front of the camera, and then that actual process of kind of shifting your mind, like I'm performing this thing that I might get inspired by looking at one of the photographs here. So you're like thinking of a character to kind of embody, but at the same time, like turn your mind off and then go like behind the camera and be like, this is what I'm looking for. I didn't get it yet. So I'm also working digitally, so I have that wiggle room to kind of see, did I get the picture yet? Where she didn't have that luxury, you know? Any other questions?
I'm not sure I have a question, but I encountered these works in the 60s going to MoMA all the time, and there was a special room with them, and I'm just interested in, I think there was a shock value when you were in the 60s, when you were looking at them, that I wonder, given today's culture with how the perception of them, if one hadn't perceived them in real time somewhat. And I'm trying to figure that out with the Brassaï, like whether people in the 30s seeing them, if they were shown or published, I don't know, the curators here can say, you know, what the experience was. And, you know, what your experience is now is, of course, very professional and artistic because you are looking deeply into that. So it's a commentary that I wish you could maybe respond to.
Yeah. No, I think it is interesting to, you know, things that might have seemed more out of the ordinary then have come more to an everyday, you know, just a guy in tattoos, you know, or a lady swallowing swords. No, not that, not that. But you know what I'm saying? It's more accepted, but it's not necessarily that they're treated any better, or they're not looked at as different, or that we're not looked at as different, you know? Did you have a question?
Well, you recently started incorporating other people back. You recently started incorporating other people in your photographs with you. Have you like, do you take on, have you, in terms of, you know, what you were talking about in Arbus, sort of seeing elements of her coming through the other subjects, is there anything you've noticed in that process that's different than just photographing yourself?
I guess that would be the most of the moment feeling more like Arbus, where you have to kind of get the person you're interacting with to kind of engage with you and come to the level to like make that thing that you can only see in your mind and guide them as best you can to kind of get to that space, you know? So it's another layer of like happy accidents at times, you know? I guess I'll talk a little bit more about, like, I just recently started photographing myself. I was always putting the camera on somebody else. So through most of my schooling, and especially with going to school and being in photography, like there's always assignments. So you're not really being told, you know, you're being told like basically what to do. So with that interest of the way Arbus works, I was trying to like put that on any assignment. So if it was, say, a project on flesh, I would then go back to my parents' house and I would ask my mom if she would, after her shower and she had her underwear on, if I could take a picture of her in her underwear. You know, like, so like that's a little odd, but she was willing to go there. So I have a lot of moments like that where I'm like, how can I push the uncomfortable factor? And then slowly as my practice evolved of like really being more specific about what I was gonna photograph, I was photographing others, but I was also interested in where do I fit in the world? Kind of like what I was speaking to that image of being the freak, and how do I, you know, where do I fit in? So I would go to people's homes, photograph them in their space, but at the same time, incorporate myself into their space as well. So maybe I'm part of their family, maybe this is my space, but maybe it's not. And so that the viewer could kind of, they would find me throughout the different images, but trying to see like which thing, like basically allowing the viewer to kind of tell me where I fit in the world.
related to space. I know you talked a little bit about this with regards to your installations, but with Arbus, she was really interested in both internal space and how people were in their private homes, and then how they presented themselves publicly to the world. And I'm just curious to know, because I know some of your photographs show people, well, you, but in costume, internally in their homes, where they're very much in their personal space. That's very intimate, and I'm curious to know the difference or your choice of taking those characters outdoors and like why you choose to do that.
So photographing out in the world when I moved to LA was more about me not having access to places, so I could kind of wander and find places that I could respond to. But now that I have a little more access and people are interested in inviting me into their spaces, I can kind of respond to that. But there's still a layer of like, this isn't my space, So, and I don't always have a lot of time in those environments, so it's really I think there's still a layer of like, this isn't quite right. And that's almost like the breakdown of things that I like, where things are revealed. Maybe you see my nails in the picture, which I rock these nails all the time, but like that character, that old lady sitting on the couch might not be like, it's not the full story of that person, but just like complicating the scene a little bit by letting things reveal.
I know, right? What are your thoughts on working? What are your thoughts about working in black and white, for example, which you haven't done?
But I have.
But recently.
Recently.
Oh, okay.
But I'm saying, like, what are your thoughts, I guess, on the disadvantages and advantages of working in black and white? Because so much of your work is kind of revealed in these like nuances in the background, the foreground. I mean, there's something like little hints, I guess, on the photograph.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious of what are your thoughts on it.
Yeah. My thoughts on black and white photography, or black and whiteness. No, black and white photography. Just photography. I learned in the tradition of black and white photography, so I actually mostly photographed in black and white photography until I was at Yale. And it was mostly about not wanting to ingest any more chemicals. But I think that my eye still sees things in that way. That the image could be flipped into black and white and still have that charge, but I'm also like aware of color, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a specific palette that I'm trying to achieve, but I can pull things out in the surroundings in that sense. But I think I see things in black and white. Are you actually wearing black and white, ma'am? Okay.
Given the kind of power of the way in which race and gender are kind of mediated in America, I mean, how do you, in your engaging that, I mean, do you feel like you're negotiating that, or do you feel that you can have a kind of identity that's not kind of controlled by those kinds of mediations?
We got some heavy hitters here. No, I can't not be affected by that. I have a responsibility to address those things and speak from a body of privilege because the way I appear, and to address those issues to people that look like me so that we can kind of get there together and dissolve some of these issues, But it's a lot for one person to do. I'm not the only one doing it, though.
But to that point, like Diane's going out and seeking all these people to try to capture all these different facets, whether it's like drag or twins, but you're doing it yourself. If you're repeating yourself, or even you've recently sort of touched on drag culture too. Can you speak to that, or influences of that?
Maybe that was another one of my interests in Arbus's work, is that I always heard stories of my mom living in Baltimore a certain part of her life, and being friends with Divine and John Waters. And so I would hear stories about that. And so I think also my level of not seeing these people as freaks was this kind of acceptance that my mom built in me, and how to just see people in a different way, you know. I don't know if that really answers that, but no, no.
Your work, what I've seen of your work, has a very old-fashioned 50s, 60s feel to it. I mean, obviously you're gravitating. Are you comfortable in that time period, or do you have things that are, I mean, you're lucky in LA, we've got a lot of that architecture, but are you more comfortable in that time period than in the current one?
I'm drawn to it. I don't know if I'm more comfortable there. I didn't live during that time, but there's an interesting point that just about everything that I'm addressing in my work that was relevant then hasn't changed now and is still relevant, you know?
What percentage of your work is accidental, or just as you're driving down the 405 or whatever, you're like, I want to get a picture of me in this outfit in front of that?
I don't know the exact, yeah, but it's a lot of that. I drive around a lot, or someone might send me a picture of a space, or I might see a wig that I'm responding to. I might be driving down the street and see someone else walking down the street, and I want to recreate that person or that part of that.
When you do your installations and mixed media, like wallpapers and all that, well, you basically curate your own wall or your own space. Did Diane do any of that? Or I see this wall kind of doing similar things as what you're doing now. Is there a correlation, or is there any similarities?
In this particular hang, I don't think Arbus knows anything about this. So it's an interesting thing to happen upon. So that was something that she was very clear about. She's not gonna shake up things in the way I'm like saying, okay, I need this to be here. So there's the difference, a really strong difference, and like I can kind of see it in my head and how I want it to be before maybe it even gets taken, where she would kind of move around the world and get to that point where she could make the picture.
What are your thoughts about other forms of storytelling, like film or documentary? Do you see yourself ever getting involved in that medium, or using it as a vehicle to further expand your work? Or how do you feel about film in general?
I have done, like earlier, like while I was in graduate school, I did do a little bit of video work there, and at my show at the California African American Museum, I had a short video as part of that. I think the problem with, I don't know if it's a problem, but it feels, that's the word I came up with, is that my mind is like, I can do all of these things, and you kind of have to just stop and address and work with what feels, urgent at the moment. All of those things are tools that I have accessed and will, access more in the future, I'm sure. Yeah. And now we dance.